In Ireland, the housing crisis doesn't always start with a rent increase. Sometimes it starts with a letter, a notice, a deadline, a sentence that turns your stomach. You have to leave. Not because you trashed the place, not because you didn't pay, because the owner is selling. And that's the kind of instability that changes a person. Ireland can look modern from the outside. Glass buildings, cranes, busy streets, new offices. A country that feels like it is moving forward. But renters know a different Ireland. A quieter Ireland. The Ireland where your home is not fully yours, even when you pay for it. The Ireland where stability can be canceled by somebody else's decision. And once that fear enters your life, it spreads into everything. You stop relaxing, you stop settling, you stop planning like your address is real, because you learn the brutal truth: your home can be temporary, even when your life isn't. That is Ireland's signature pain. Not just cost, instability. You can feel it in the way people live. House shares that were meant to be temporary become adulthood. A room for rent becomes a long-term plan. Your life fits into one suitcase because you never trust the ground to stay still. And when you do find a place, you don't celebrate. You hold your breath. Because the rental market doesn't feel like a market. It feels like a test. A viewing becomes a crowd. People arrive early, not excited, nervous. Documents in hand like proof of innocence, pay slips, references, bank screenshots. You don't walk in asking, "Is this home right for me?" You walk in thinking, "Will they pick me?" And even if you're perfect, you can still lose. Because in a tight market, need doesn't win. Speed wins. The safest file wins. The quietest tenant wins. So renters learn a rule that has nothing to do with dignity and everything to do with survival. Don't be difficult. Don't ask too much. Don't complain too loudly. Don't make noise. Because when there are 10 people behind you, your home starts to feel replaceable. And once you feel replaceable, you start living smaller. Small space living stops being a trend and becomes compression. A loft bed isn't clever design. It's what happens when adult life is squeezed into a room that isn't meant to hold a future. A wall desk isn't minimalist living. It's the last surface left for your life to function without sitting on your bed. Storage walls aren't aesthetic. They're evidence. Evidence that the space cannot hold a normal life. So your life must fold. These aren't solutions. They're coping. Because the alternative isn't better. The alternative is losing the address. And in Ireland, losing the address can feel like falling off a cliff, because there's another truth that locals recognize instantly. When a landlord decides to sell, it doesn't matter how good a tenant you were, you still have to move. And that is why renters live with a constant what if. What if the landlord sells? What if the rent rises again? What if I complain and become the problem tenant? That fear reshapes your personality. You become quieter, more apologetic, more careful, not because you want to, because the market trained you. Now, zoom out for a second. Ireland's housing pressure isn't a rumor, it's counted. Official planning documents estimate the country needs an average of about 33,000 new homes per year over the plan period. But even when you hear a number like that, the crisis doesn't feel like a number. It feels like time and power, because the demand for support is also counted. Tens of thousands of households are qualified for social housing support, and tens of thousands more rely on schemes that still depend on the private rental market. Put together, it describes a reality locals recognize: a long line of people who need a permanent, secure answer. So when renters feel like stability is rare, they're not imagining it. They're living inside a gap that has been measured. Now, the unfair comparison that makes people angry. In a normal world, a full-time job should buy stability. That was the deal people believed in. Work hard, pay your way, build a life. But the housing crisis breaks the deal. It creates a new reality. Income does not buy a home. It buys a chance, a fragile chance. A chance that depends on an agent choosing you, a landlord renewing you, an owner not selling, a market not turning against you next month. So why does Ireland feel like this? Not slogans, not blame, just repeating forces. First, demand concentrates where opportunity concentrates. When jobs, universities, hospitals, and transport pull people into the same places, housing becomes a choke point. And when supply cannot keep up, competition becomes permanent. Second, scarcity turns selection into cruelty. Landlords and agents can choose the safest file, so renters start performing safety. They prove themselves too much, explain too much, and compete too hard. And people who should feel like adults start feeling like applicants. Third, instability spreads. When more landlords sell, more tenancies end. When more tenancies end, more people flood the market again, and the market becomes tighter, faster, harsher. Fourth, the support system can still feel temporary. Because even with support schemes, many people remain exposed to private market instability. Now, people ask the question they always ask: what is the government doing? Here's what exists on paper. Rent pressure. Zones cap rent increases in many high-demand areas. In those zones, rent can only be increased once in a 12-month period, and the increase is capped at the rate of inflation, or 2%, whichever is lower. That's real. That's a rule. There is also cost rental, a state-backed model where rent is based on the cost of building and managing homes, not on bidding wars. It is designed to be a long-term, secure rental option and is marketed as significantly below market rents in the same area. And the national plan sets out supply targets and pathways for social housing and affordability. So yes, rules exist, programs exist, targets exist. On paper, the system is moving. But renters don't live on paper. They live in outcomes. And the outcome renters recognize is this: the crowd at the viewing is still there. The agent still picks someone else. The perfect tenant still gets rejected. The notice to leave still arrives, because caps don't create new homes, and targets don't protect you from the fear of being replaced. And when a landlord decides to sell, a rent cap doesn't stop the move. That gap is where Ireland's housing crisis becomes personal. Not theoretical. Personal. It's you reading a letter, counting days, calling friends, searching again, packing again. And slowly, the crisis takes something deeper than money. It takes confidence. It makes people afraid to settle, afraid to commit, afraid to build a life that might need an address. because the ground is unstable. So here's the ending that should sit heavy. If your home can be taken away by a decision you didn't make, what does that do to a whole country of renters? What happens to relationships postponed, to families delayed, to lives built on temporary keys? Subscribe to follow this series, country by country, because this is not one place. It is a pattern.